Hi, welcome. I just really wanted to make a video today and just sort of talk about my experience of going to see Dr. Gabor last week in Melbourne, and just kind of share that experience with everybody because I found it really changing. Like, I feel changed, like I'm a different person after seeing that. And I really felt like I really wanted to bring that back and kind of share what was there because a lot of us don't talk about it enough or bring it to the table. So whilst I was fortunate enough to be able to go to that seminar, I actually took some notes to bring back because there was so much there that I observed that I really felt like needed to be up for discussion and really kind of brought to the table and talked about. And I think that it's time for us to have these conversations and to really I don't know what the word is, but to really kind of bring it out there and to really start to share what it is that we have seen, heard, and experienced, and also to bring out the things that are concerning us too, like where we live and what we do. So his whole talk was called The Myth of Normal. And you know what's normal, right? We're all there. So it whilst I have some of his books and I've listened to a lot of his work and I've also studied a couple of his certificate courses, it's been a very interesting ride. In his work can be quite controversial simply because he's bringing things to the table that are probably still considered taboo in our society. Now, Dr. Gabor Mate, for those who are not familiar with him, he is an 81-year-old retired physician. So he actually has a medical background. He was Hungarian born and at the end of this, in the Second World War, and he had a Jewish mother and Jewish family. So you can only imagine, like, you know, what his life has also been like. And coming from a Hungarian mother myself, and the trauma that's in our family line, it's actually really quite interesting hearing other people's perspectives and takes on that. He grew up in Canada, had studied and worked in Canada, self-confessed workaholic, has worked with lots of, families, trauma, counselling, mental health institutes, as well as addiction centres. So you can imagine, like, the decades and wealth of experience that he brings to that table, and the things that he observed is actually what he was sharing. So what he has learnt over the years is that there's always a root cause to a lot of these problems, and they all seem to be the same. So I actually found it really quite interesting in his discussion because he was actually bringing a lot of medical science to the table. So he was actually coming from a scientific perspective, not a woo-woo perspective. And as most people who know me, you know, I absolutely love the woo-woo side of things, or spiritual, like, because I don't want to be disrespectful, but the spiritual side of things and different causes and why we do what we do. So what he actually talks about is healing and the human condition, and humanity as they are, and why they experience the certain things that they do. And he actually talks about, in my notes here, healing is aligned with modern science. So when he went into it, he talked about Native American Indian, the medicine wheel, and the working towards wholeness. So their medicine actually is based on the wholeness of the entire body and the human spirit. And they don't just treat the body, the mind, and then the spirit. So it's actually all together as a whole. So, and the word actually health, funnily enough, he actually talked about this. The etymology for the word health, which I've actually got up here, is actually related to whole. So it's actually all about wholeness. So then when he referred that to the Western and modern systems of healing, we actually don't have a healthcare system. It's a medical system, because the medical system actually breaks down into specializations. So we have like neuro surgeons and scientists, and we have gynecologists, and we have oncologists, and everybody is separated into their own speciality, and they treat that one particular issue rather than the whole entire person. So that is also something that I find fascinating, because in my world, like in healing, we actually work at going back deep into the causes of why somebody actually has that dis-ease in their body. And a lot of that actually finds a root cause back in like emotional trauma. So that's in my experience of what I've seen as a healer. Obviously, I'm not a medicine person. I haven't studied medicine traditionally, so I don't have like a doctor's background or anything like that, but I only work with the human spirit, and obviously like in a different realm as a healer. But it's very interesting having that conversation and seeing doctors and physicians who have actually worked with medicine people and traditional medicine people who also work with the body, mind, and spirit as a whole, much like a healer. And so what they're saying is that modern science has data, and they have actually done the studies to be able to show that, you know, there is no disconnection, that the body is actually together. Unfortunately, doctors and modern science, modern medicine don't bring those two together. So, you know, there's been studies on, for instance, he referred to ADHD, for instance. Now, we know that we've got that now in epidemic proportions in our community. And ADHD, so attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I know one of my brothers was diagnosed with that when he was very young, and he was one of the very few, and nobody knew what the heck it was. And so it was very hard to treat unless you were just given a medication. Whereas today it seems to be in epidemic proportions. Everybody relates to it. And in all of these medical and scientific journals who, you know, studied, like they've actually done the studies on these, there's actually no genes. It's not a genetic anomaly. It's not something that's actually hereditary and passed down through families. It's actually now become a cultural problem. And what he actually talks about is how our mindset and our belief systems determine our physiology. So when we actually apply that to something like ADHD, for instance, it then becomes a collective issue, because it just goes to show how stressed we are as human beings. And so what he actually talks about is going back to childhood experience and trauma. Now, he was actually really good at being able to articulate what trauma actually was, because, you know, some people like relate trauma to just one specific time period or an event, and other people talk about trauma as something that builds over time. Now, what he actually talks about is childhood trauma is an ongoing stress. So it is a wound that is created from something that has happened over time. So trauma is what happens then inside of you because of what happened to you. So for instance, if, you know, as a parent, like, I'm not perfect. I'm the first one to put my hand up for that and to say, like, we've all messed this up. Like, it can be pretty shit sometimes. But when you yell at your kid, for instance, you know, that's not just going to create like a one-off trauma. But for instance, if that then is the way that you treat them all the time, and you're just constantly screaming and yelling and enraging and all of those things, then you go on to actually create a wound. And then that then becomes a trauma. Now, what happens is, like, when in childhood you live with these things and you grow up with them, you then find coping mechanisms for your survival, like a strategy for your coping way of being able to survive through that. So that's when you start to get addictions, you know, like smoking, drinking, social anxieties, and all of these are adaptations for your survival through that as you grow up and you get older. So it's really interesting that a lot of us in the Western countries, for instance, seem to have this quite en masse. And, you know, I was talking about it with a friend afterwards, and we were kind of discussing how the fact that it feels like it's actually become a bit of a shame for our country or our culture, because our culture is not supporting like families, and it's not family orientated. And that actually goes on to show in the statistics that he also talked about, was that dis-ease in our society, and especially in women. And what he actually talked about, and like, please, I'm not being feminist, I'm not being sexist, I'm not being any kind of discrimination. We're actually talking about, from a scientific data perspective, what is on show. And what he actually talked about was, like, number one is that women compulsively are emotionally worried about other people. The statistics is multiple sclerosis, so MS. In 1939, the ratio of men to women was 1:1. In 2025, we now have the ratio of 1 to 3.5, so 1 man to 3.5 women. And what he actually explained was that this was largely because women have had to take on the mental and emotional, they are the carriers, and the female gender has been trained to take on the concerns of everybody around them. So whether it's their work colleagues, whether it's their husbands, whether it's their children, whether it's their family members, parents, they all go out to work and then they worry about the people at work as well. And over time and generationally, women have been conditioned, I guess that's the word, to be the carriers of all of those things and to worry about all those things for everybody else, because let's face it, men don't look after themselves the way that we do look after them. So, and I'm the first one to admit that too, like we give more than what we get. And so that then has actually created a culture of expectation, like in our society, which then has now perpetuated like disease, and notably more so in women than men. So more often than not, what he explained was that autoimmune diseases, so where diseases of your immune system actually attack yourself, are more prevalent in women as well. So it goes to show that everything in our mind creates a physiology in our bodies. So, what we think, how we feel, like what we believe, then becomes manifest in our health and well-being. So I found his talk, especially with the scientific background, that these studies have already been done. They have the data on these things. The ADHD thing, he said, like if you were going to go and see a specialist on that, they wouldn't actually know that there's no genetics involved, because they don't really read the information that goes with these studies. So it's really, really fascinating that, automatically we're just treating with medicine rather than like treating the whole system. So, and whilst we're lucky enough to live in a time where we have medicine and we have traditional folk remedies and situations so that you can actually work with using the whole body, it's really interesting that the modern medicine system just goes straight to one thing. So it was really interesting hearing this from an actual doctor. So somebody who's obviously been on the ground, who's obviously like been there and seen so many things. But he also just talks about the addictions, like coping mechanisms. For instance, like, he gave a lot of examples to do with families, like say for instance, like, alcoholic, if you grew up with alcoholic family members, then usually like the wife or the children or somebody else like in that family will then take on the emotional needs of the adult in the room. And then they will suppress their own emotions, suppress their own needs, and then those things will then, go on to find their own coping mechanisms as they grow up. So these are all, adverse childhood experiences. And he also explained about the people-pleasing coping tool. I know that that's something that I've, struggled with too in my world and growing up, is the people-pleasing is the only way that you can get attention, maybe, or to kind of fawn for love, like you want somebody to love you, because if you're not heard or you're not being seen, then, who's going to love you back, type of thing. So it's a really interesting thing, especially with mothers. Like I know that my friend and I, who I went with, we really, like I actually broke down and cried like throughout a lot of the talk, for the simple reason, like there was so much that hit home in my own parenting. So like where I've come from to where I am also as a mother, and just the mistakes that we have made and the things that we have shared and the things that, like if you don't know, you can't fix it. Like you can't change what you don't acknowledge, And so once you know, and you can't go back. And so there's so many things in that you know, collectively we can see how much of our lives have been determined by a lot of the people around us, and whether or not we've been raised with a family unit and a village and that unconditional love, or whether or not, you know, we have been loved. And one of the things that I took away from that, and it was really interesting because he talks about, you know, our mindset and our beliefs determine our physiology. So, like how our body actually responds. He talked about something from his own childhood, like when he was born, that his mother, obviously, they were experiencing the war in Hungary, and he said his grandparents were deported to Auschwitz, and he said on the day that his grandparents were deported, his mother didn't know, but that day her milk dried up, and so she'd obviously, I hope I've got the story right, she took him to see a pediatrician because he wouldn't stop crying, and the pediatrician said, look, all of my Jewish babies are crying. And, you know, as a mother, like that really hit home, because our natural instincts are to nurture and to love and to support and to, you know, look after the babies. So that really kind of hit home too, especially like with, you know, having a Hungarian story myself. But all of us come from some kind of wounding or trauma. And one of the big things that I really took away from this particular experience was, and I've actually underlined it like in green pen with a big love heart, and it says, love them anyway. Yeah, they might piss you off. Yeah, they might say things that you don't like. Sometimes you just want to, you know, kick them up the backside or throw them off a bridge. Let's face it. We all have our moments and our days, but you still love them anyway. And that was something that really hit home, because it doesn't matter how upset you get, how angry you get, you still find yourself still wanting to help and look after them, and to be there for them, and to help resolve some of these things. So I just found it really, really interesting that in all of his research, in all of the things that he's seen, all the things that he's experienced, was that at the end of the day, it was human connection that actually helped to heal addictions and trauma. And, you know, bless like the end of this particular seminar, there was a question and answer, and this most incredible human put their hand up and was so brave, and took the microphone and stood there, and, you know, they said their name and they said hello, and then they kind of choked and started to kind of weep, and we were all like, oh great, you know, because we couldn't see who it was. And this person just said, do I heal the addiction first, or do I heal the trauma? And, you know, drop the mic. What a moment. We all sat there and went, well, that was a hell of a question. And Dr. Mate came to the edge of the stage and just went, oh, like he was this moment where he actually got to do what he did. And he said, you know, will you work with me? And asked their permission. And so said, what is your addiction? You know, what was your trauma, basically? And so publicly, this was all disclosed in front of us, this healing session. And he was able to walk through some of the techniques and the things that he needed to do to help this person to actually start somewhere. And it was, you know, build your support team, have those that love you around you, you know, have the people who are in your corner, like be there with you. And he said at the end of the day, what it actually comes down to is you can't just heal the addiction and you can't just heal the trauma. You actually have to do the two together. And there's no two ways about that, because that's what the wholeness comes back to. So I found this whole seminar so profound, in that a lot of these things we actually already know, especially in healing, like treating the whole body and treating the whole system. But there was also the parts in there that a lot of the systems already know these things, but everything is segregated and compartmentalized. And, you know, mentally, like I know I do it. I'm guilty of those days when I'm really stressed, or I've got a lot of stuff going on, or, you know, you've got to deal like with lots of things. Is that you can actually go, okay, well, today I'm just going to put that in there and I'll get back to that later. And over here, I'll go and do this because it's really hard or it's really difficult. And so then when you start compartmentalizing, yes, it's a coping tool for that moment, but long term, it doesn't actually serve us, because then we're segmenting and fragmenting ourselves and our mind, and we're actually not being able to heal and get through like what it is that we need to do. So it's almost like the soul work that we work with too in healing is like a fragmented soul, you know, where they have only pieces of themselves that are able to access, and then some of them are like in other places because they've been shattered or traumatized, and so they shelf that so that they don't have to see it or deal with it. And then when there's a hole, or say you've got a vase with a crack in it, through that crack you will have a leak, so then you will find a reason to start to mask that up and to hold that in place so that you know, won't keep leaking all the time. And so therefore, you know, that you experience a coping mechanism. So I found this whole experience really, really enlightening. Challenged myself in a lot of ways. Challenged myself because I really had to take a really good deep look in the mirror as well at my own self and my own traumas that I bring to the table, especially as a mother and as a friend, you know, lover, whatever, sister, like in all of those situations. It really made me like sit in deep thought. And afterwards, like my friend and I, we couldn't go back to our hotel, we couldn't sleep, because we were just pondering so much and processing so much of what had been shared and discovered. So we ended up going to the casino in Melbourne and getting some donuts and sitting on the edge of the Yarra River underneath the full moon, and just really talk and reflect and cry and just kind of think and grieve like through these things. But once we know, like, you know, we're being held and looking out for each other, then, you know, of course we're going to make those changes. So I guess like getting back to the whole, for me in particular, is love them anyway. I have to apply that in my own life right now. You know, even like my own mother wound and, you know, lover wound and all those sorts of things as well, is that sometimes like people can also be in your life and you can love them, and sometimes they also make choices. And so you kind of have to learn in a funny kind of way how to love them anyway. And that's something that obviously I'm really like reflecting on and looking at. And I hope that we all can together as well, because honestly, the only way that we're all going to heal is actually together. And I think that's really something that Dr. Mate brought to the table, was that the only way that we as a person are going to become whole is to work together. Like that is such a Pluto in Aquarius situation right there, is like, do it for humanity. Like it's all based on humanity. It is collectively, like Pluto, you know, the god of the underworld, he works out in one of the outer planets, like works on a collective level. And on that collective level, we are actually working. Aquarius is all about humanity, is like working together. And so I have been really, really inspired to sort of look at this and to really kind of try to find compassion, be as authentic as possible. That was another thing that he brought up, was authenticity. Authenticity means to where did we actually write it? Is to be auto to ourselves. So authentic to ourselves and like put ourselves first. And that's actually not selfish. It's actually the most important thing, because if we aren't okay, we can't look after everybody else. And it shows like with so many women, obviously, who are really unwell or whose immune system are attacking themselves because they believe that they don't have the ability to care for themselves first. So I think collectively we really need to reflect on that and really work together to support each other and say, well, how can I help? You know, what do you need? Like, where are you? You know, where are you at? And meeting people where they're at. And sometimes that also involves you loving them from a distance, but you love them anyway. So thank you for letting me share like this little piece of wisdom that I've learnt, because I just felt it was so important in reflecting. A lot of his message was about kindness and compassion and authenticity for each and every single one of us, so that we can all then collectively actually heal. So I hope that you get to take something a little bit away from that. And if you've got any questions, please feel free to message me or inbox down below. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your day, look after each other, and love them anyway.